Okay, I think I mastered the technology. Hi, everyone. I am so excited today to be talking to the Tina Payne Bryson about her new book, The Bottom Line for Baby, which I love so much. I have two copies because it's so awesome. I'm going to be giving it to all my friends having babies and someday to my kids having babies. So welcome, Tina, and thank you so much for taking the time in your launch week, your big launch week, to talk to me and to my friends about your new book.
Oh, thank you, Kaki. I would, any week, any day, I would make time for you. You are one of my
Aw.
favorite people. And thank you for all the support and love around this book. It's so exciting because it's so hard when you are a parent of a new baby, whether you've done it before or not. There are so many decisions to be made, and you get such competing advice. And even the researchers are not necessarily in agreement. Everything you read is in conflict. There's some basics. Everybody knows you buy a car seat for your baby. Like, there's not a lot of controversy around that. But really, there are so many things that there are just these competing voices. And as new parents, like, we don't have time to go deep into figuring out what do we do. And so I just really wanted, this was the first book, I guess, I had a longing for as a parent. I was like, why isn't there something that walks me through what are the main arguments, like what are even the options, right? And then what does the science say, and what is the bottom line for what based on that science? And so it just still didn't exist. So I was like, well, shoot, I'm done having babies, but I'm gonna have grandbabies. And I joke that it's sort of like a way to kind of slip in advice to my daughters-in-law. I have three sons. Should they decide to marry women and have babies with them, or whoever they decide to co-parent with, it's like a way for me to not give advice all the time. I'll just be like, here's this book I wrote. Like, I'm preemptively trying to like get my info in there.
Well, I'm always quoting your books, whether it's The Whole Brain Child or No Drama Discipline or The Yes Brain, to my friends and kids. So this is definitely I'm gonna add this one to the collection that I refer to. And it's even better when you say my friend wrote this book, because then it's not exactly you, and yet this is definitely the book that I wish I had had when I was a new mom. I just was so neurotic. I wanted to be the perfect parent.
Yeah.
I wanted to find the right answer, and of course I love books. You can see from my wall, like I read all the time. So I thought, okay, there's got to be an answer. And I remember reading What to Expect When You're Expecting.
Yep.
I was like 9 months pregnant and being like, oh, as soon as this baby arrives, I'm just going to have a disaster because there's so many things that can go wrong. And it just sent me into this tizzy of fear of like all the terrible things that you can't possibly prevent against, and all the competing things you're supposed to do at the same time. And what I really love about The Bottom Line for Baby is you really acknowledge you can't do everything, right? You can't protect against every terrible or even small harm that might come to your kids. So it's such a better approach to be realistic about what a parent can do. But I'd love to hear from you about that, striking that balance between like, oh, do it all right, do it all perfect, find the one answer, and like, we live our lives.
Well, not only is there not necessarily even a right way to do a lot of these things, but what I've learned, and I think with each child you have different perspective, not only because your older kids are older. I mean, obviously, but it gives you the perspective to be like, gosh, that one thing I worried so much about it, I don't think it even matters. So you get that perspective, but also each individual kid is so different and their needs are different. And so as I dug into this book and the research of this book, what I found that I really wanted to do, actually was easy to do, which was to communicate to parents, look, there are a handful of things that you really better do right, like car seats, watching them near water, loving the hell out of them and showing up for them and building trust in your relationship by just responding to their needs in quick and sensitive ways. Those are the things. But the truth is that most of the things that feel like this is the most crucial decision I'm going to make for my baby isn't really all that crucial in terms of how they turn out. So my hope for this book was that within just a couple of minutes, because it's organized alphabetically, a parent can be empowered to have that knowledge, right? The newest knowledge on that topic, and then be empowered to let go of a lot of the fear and let go of a lot of the pressure, and to trust their baby and to trust themselves and to do what works for their family. And I really believe, I hope this is the case, and I hope, and this is the feedback I've gotten so far, is that no matter what people do, and I've picked the topics I picked are the ones we get the most competing information about are the ones that are most controversial. That no matter what you do, even on the hot button issues like breastfeeding, vaccinations, circumcision, co-sleeping, sleep training, I think those are the 5 biggest ones, that you will not feel judged. Even if the science comes down really firmly in one area and you have read it and you already did something with another kid, or you're past that point of deciding, or you feel strong in a different position, that you will not feel judged. You will feel sort of the context of all this saying, do what works for you and your family, and feel confident in those decisions. And anyone who's being a naysayer, you can be like, well, go read the entry on germs and know that it's fine to lick your baby's pacifier clean. It'll reduce their eczema and allergy rate, So I think I really believe that. And I really think it's so important that we do let the pressure wash off of us and know that there are many, many ways to be the perfect parent for your child and your family.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way you phrase that, because it really is true. And I tell parents that all the time, like, there can be all the experts in the world telling you in theory what works for, a statistically relevant sample of kids, but you're parenting the child in your home. And you're going to have a better data collection and like better observations. And also you're testing out like what is working. And so you're the best person positioned to say, you know what, actually, this is my gut call, right? And I like the parameters you've set around like obviously safety and connection and like supporting your child's emotional well-being. But I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about, I have 2 questions. So the first one is a little bit more about those fraught topics, because I think that's when I first became aware of like the mommy wars when my, kids were little. It's like, when are you going back to work? Are you going back to work? Are you co-sleeping? Right. and it's sometimes I think that because we care so much about finding that perfect answer, that we then invest, like, I had to do it right, and so this person is doing it wrong. And that almost divides us as parents.
Totally.
So in some ways, I feel like this approach of saying there's a lot of trade-offs, your kid best, it's a way to maybe bridge some of those mommy war gaps, or like the, things that we can't talk about to some of our friends because we've made different decisions.
I think the way you characterize that is so good and important, because I think that is the root of the mommy wars, that we feel like we've made a decision, and for someone to say, that's not the right way to do it, really gets at the core of our fears and insecurities that we're not doing the right thing. It feels like a personal attack on the thing that matters the most to us in the world. So it's very tender. It really is. It's really tender, those decisions. But I think that idea of really knowing that there are so many different ways to do it is so important. And, my best friend and I from my growing up years had our first babies within a week of each other. And she and I did things totally different. And her kid and my kid are both 20 now, and neither one of them are perfect, but they're both awesome kids. And so I truly believe, and I wish I had known this back then, but I truly believe that in the long run, in terms of who your kid turns out to be, even the big ones, like working or not, like breastfeeding or not, like sleep training or not, don't really impact as much as people think they do. And then there are other things. I mean, there's so many things in this book that you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I had to worry about that, but I don't. Like, for instance, the science says it's really okay to use DEET on your baby after the first couple of weeks.
Wow.
I know, it was shock. I still don't know that I would feel comfortable doing it, but at least I know, like, if I needed to, the science says it's totally fine. Sunscreen, not before 6 months. I would have thought sunscreen would have been okay earlier. So there were some things that were surprises to me. And one thing that I wouldn't have known to worry about that was helpful information was like those white sound machines we put in our babies' rooms to keep them sleeping longer. A lot of them make way too much noise, and they can actually be hard on their hearing.
Oh, wow.
So we can use an app on our phone and put it where our baby sleeps, like put your phone in the crib and turn on your baby's sound machine and find out how many decibels it is. And in the book I lay out, it shouldn't be over whatever, 85 decibels, I believe it was. And so there are little things like that that we can be more intentional about that we didn't know that we needed to pay attention to. But a lot of things like licking the pacifier clean, all of those things, we can be like, okay, it's fine. No one judge me. And even if they do, I'm like, it's all right. I'm following what the science says.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that you sort of assess and categorize, the sort of things that where there's a very clear scientific answer, that parents are also free to say, that's outweighed by this other thing that's happening in our family, and where it's like, your call, science doesn't have an answer. And not just, I know how hard you worked on this book. I know how many studies you read. And the fact is the science changes quickly. So a new parent barely has time to read like the entry on germs in this, much less read all the studies that went into that. Right. I remember when I had my first baby, we were visiting my stepdaughter and her mom, and my husband and I went out with my stepdaughter, and her mom watched the baby, and I came back and she had put him on his tummy to sleep, because when she was raising Samantha, you let your baby sleep on their tummies, and I was horrified. And of course, like, the baby didn't die, right? So like, we survived that, but like, it's hard to stay on top, even for kids that are like 5-10 years apart. Things really change. And I think that's what's really valuable about this, in September 2020, we know what sort of the up-to-date sidence is.
I mean, just think about how much the world has changed in the last 7 months, right? I mean, things we thought we knew we didn't know, and things we thought we didn't know we know, it's crazy. So yeah, I will be having to update the book, and this may become a series, I don't know. There might be one for teens. Like, do you let them, what does the research say about parents providing alcohol? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of big, more important kinds of things, whether that, other than like, is it okay to lick the pacifier clean? There's some bigger stake kinds of things later. But it's been really fun too, because the research was so interesting. It was really grueling. But one of my challenges is, research can be biased. And so one of my jobs was to really not only say, what does the science say, but evaluate the quality of those studies. So that was a whole other, unfortunately, I had a lot of classes on that in my doctoral program. But I think that it's really important too for us to think about how unobjective we are as humans, and to know we have so many implicit biases. We've also been looking at that more in our world right now with regard to race, but there are a lot of implicit biases around parents and parenting and our babies and these kinds of things. So I worked really hard, Kathy, to be as objective as I can. And there are entries where it like killed me to put down what the science said, because it was not what I believed or practiced, but I was committed to credible information in this book. And so that's why I felt at one point I was like, but I need to say something else. And it doesn't fit into these two perspectives, what the science says, bottom line. So in about a third of the entries, I added something called on a personal note. And sometimes I tell a story, like I tell a story about how I knew I was supposed to do tummy time, and that the science says that's really important. And I put my baby down, and his face was just like in the floor, and he was so miserable, and he looked like a little alien. He was just so uncomfortable, and I was like, I'm not doing this. And then other times I weigh in and I say, look, the science is saying this, but I think the science is missing this other question. So that was the sleep training article was the most, or the entry was, that was the most difficult one to write, because first of all, shockingly, there's very little quality science on sleep training. And one of the big issues around why that's the case is that parents are known to be notoriously horrible reporters on their children. So if you give measures to parents to fill out on their children and their babies, they're notoriously terrible sources of information on their children when it comes to research. And especially when they're looking back and saying, well, how, I can barely remember anything about some of those early sleep kinds of things, because you're so sleep deprived, your brain doesn't consolidate those memories. But there's very few really credible studies, less than like 15 on sleep training. And some of them don't ask even the questions I really had. So in that entry, I had a whole other thing about, on a personal note, I talked about what I did. And then I talked about how I think that whole research is missing, looking at stress levels and what's happening in the process of sleep training. So, the research answers the questions. Yes, it works. There's some caveats to that. Not for all babies, not just a one-time, one and done. Does it harm my baby? The research says no. Does it harm my relationship with the baby? The research says no. And I think that's really helpful to know. So whether you sleep train or not, like, you don't have to sleep train. Babies do learn how to sleep. But if you do or don't, you can feel good reading this entry. But I really feel like no one really has looked at the state of stress that babies are in and how that's different for different babies. So I think that's a really missing piece of the literature. And so I wanted to add in some of those things to think about regarding your personal baby. I feel like had I sleep trained my firstborn, it would have been traumatic for him. That's not to say that kids don't have traumatic experiences like getting a shot at the doctor or, those kinds of things. And then they recover from them in the context of lots of love and attention and attunement and sensitive parenting. But every kid is so different. My other kids, it wouldn't have been traumatic for. So I just think it's so important that we look at some of the nuances. And I didn't do anything someone else couldn't do. Like, if someone wanted to read all the science on any one of these topics, they can go for it. And in the index, and also on my website, I have all the stuff that I read. So people can go and read it. Yeah. And I wanted to be really transparent about the studies I was using and all of that, because I worked really hard, and I wanted to know all of that as well.
Yeah. And it's such an important point that just because there is no answer or the science doesn't show something doesn't necessarily mean, that what you think it means, right? That science is biased even in what researchers choose to study, right? Or even the limits of what you can study, right? In a controlled way. So I think that's such an important nuance. And to me, I know sometimes when I hear from parents of older kids, they're like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Everyone turns out okay." That almost like discounts the choices we're making that we think really hard about, and we read a ton of books, and we make a decision that's important to us and to our families. Yeah. And I love that you're not sort of saying, "You're fine, just do whatever you want." It's like, yeah, of course we're going to assess things and look at our families and look at the kid we have and make a gut decision. And sometimes it's like almost like the art and science of parenting, where like, there's some things you can actually say yes or no, and there's some things you just feel, and totally. Maybe it's just that like connection you have with your child. You're like, I know some people do this and it works for them, but this is not going to work for me.
I love that you said that, because it does matter. Those decisions do matter. I'm, and I think that's what's so important, is starting with that intentionality. And so that's what this book really helps parents do in really short form, is to think about questions they might not when it comes to those decisions. But what we do does matter. It's not just influencing like our kids' behavior and their mind. It's actually changing the architecture of their brain. So what we do matters. I think being intentional about those decisions is probably the thing that matters most, because that means we're really paying attention to what our kid needs, what we need, what our family needs. And I also think that, we have to pivot. There are so many times as a parent where I've been really confident I wanted to do it this way. And I've read the studies, and I feel it in my bones. And then it's totally a mistake because it doesn't work for my kid at that point in development. And maybe it worked for another kid, or maybe it worked 6 months ago, but it doesn't work now. So it is very much that art piece as well. That's the kind of golden key of parenting, I think, is that, what we talk about in The Power of Showing Up, which is really about helping and that's what I actually call the bottom line of the bottom line, which is that the one most important thing we really need to do besides physical safety is to tune into our kids and help them feel safe and seen and soothed and secure, to know that if they have a need, we will show up for them. And what that means is, if we're really looking at seeing our children and attuning to them, we're going to have to be flexible, and we're going to have to pivot, because things change and their needs change and our needs change. And I think sometimes too, when a book like this comes out, or any book like your book, which I love, or any of my books, sometimes parents read them and they have this like pang of regret. and they're like, oh, I wish I had known this, or
Yeah.
I feel so bad about how I did this. And I really want to shift that, or shift the lens of that feeling. And what I mean by that is, typically when that regret moment comes, what follows is kind of like a shame pit, like a shame spiral.
Right,
And
right.
then you feel bad about feeling bad. And then, and then you kind of can perseverate. And there's actually a physiological construct related to shame. So when we feel shame, our body actually gets heavy. We constrict our breathing and our chest and our body. We feel a visceral, like, pit of our stomach feeling. There's a physiological manifestation of shame that then can activate previous shame. So it's actually, that's why we call it a shame spiral. You just keep
Mm.
going and going. What I want to do is to tell parents that when you, and I have it too, and I'm sure you do too, Kaki, when you have a moment where you're like, oh, I wish I had known this, or I wish I had done this differently, or gosh, I was really rigid about that, and I should have been more responsive to what my kid needed. I've had that a few times. That moment, like when you recognize, you become aware of that feeling, to like get curious and say, okay, what is it that's, like, if it's now, if I'm like, gosh, I've, like, let's say in pandemic, I'm like, I've been a really crappy parent during pandemic, and I understand why, but I feel bad about it, right? So if you have that feeling, to pause, notice it, and then to say, okay, I'm going to get curious. I want to be the best parent I can be, and I try to be the best parent I can be. So what's getting in the way of me being the parent I want to be? And let me do some problem solving about whatever those one or two things I come up with. But if it's about the past, I think that shift I want us to all to make is when we have that feeling, to notice it and then to say, oh, this is a good thing, because to have it lead us to a place where we can say, I'm growing. This uncomfortable feeling I have right now means evolution is happening. It means I've learned something. I'm getting better as a parent. I'm more aware. So if we don't ever have those feelings, it means we're probably not growing and evolving as a parent. So we really should have that feeling from time to time, because it means that we've learned something new, that something, better is happening. So I think that's a really important reframe.
Yeah, I love that. That, like, the feeling of regret. My Brian often says to me, like, I have that a lot. He's like, oh, we have to get our regret in for this week, of like what I should have done and I didn't, or how I could have handled something better. And I
Yeah.
really prefer how you just framed it, that, like, oh, so I'm having a new insight. I'm growing. I'm on a journey. I'm open to change. Like, that's a
Totally.
really great thing. And tying it back to what we were talking about earlier with, like, how intensely we can hang on to these decisions.
Yeah.
Like, if we can just loosen the grip and be more open to revisiting, after 6 months or a year, whatever, like, seeing it's not working, maybe we can not only have less distance from other parents who are making different choices and feel less, alienated from them, or less judging of them. We can also be less judging of our past selves. Our
Absolutely.
past selves were just doing the best we could with the information we had then, and now we have more information. So we're gonna grow and change, and we're gonna show a model to our kids that we can grow and change
Exactly
and be
right.
flexible.
That's
And
exactly right.
so I know it's your week of launch. I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to ask you, this is, I believe, one of your first books solo.
It's my first
Your
solo book.
first
Yeah.
solo book. So I know that you and Dan Siegel have an amazing partnership, and I'm guessing it feels a little different to launch a book by yourself. So tell me a little bit about
That's
what's
so
it like to go out sort of on your own.
That's funny. No one's asked me that question. It's such a good question. I love writing books with Dan. He is one of my he's just been such a wonderful person in my life. And we will write more books together. I feel confident. We don't have anything, official yet, but we have ideas we've talked about. And he's been so wonderful. He wrote a lovely blurb for the book and launched me with his full blessing and support. I think the feelings I have that are different are not so much about doing the process solo. Although, gosh, it's kind of easier to not have to check in, like, we've got a big team. So it's like Dan and his wife and me and my husband, and then we've got our agent, we've got our editor, and then we've got our PR people. Like, it's a big group of people. And so if one thing, like, we got an offer for, I think, a Mongolian translation for The Power of Showing Up yesterday, and there's got to be like 8 people that weigh in on it. And it's just, it's simpler. So that's kind of nice. But I think the thing that's felt really different is this is a really different kind of book. than anything else I've ever written with Dan. The other ones with Dan are, they're not controversial. Typically, although there was a little controversy about the time in instead of time out.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I remember that.
Oh my gosh. And Time Magazine really screwed us. They changed the title of something we wrote and changed some of our text that basically made it sound like we were saying something we did not say. Anyway, that was a disaster. But most of the books that I write with Dan are like, love your kid, listen to your kid, like stuff that no one can really argue with.
Right.
This one's full of controversy. And so I don't know how that's gonna play out. I got a little message last night about how someone felt about my vaccination entry. And so that's gonna be a different experience, but I do feel proud of it in a way that feels a little bit different. It feels, every book is like you're a baby, and like it's hard, you don't love one more than the other, although I have favorites, like, maybe not, I mean, sometimes we have favorites with our kids too, like that week, right? That week. But yeah, I think I just feel really proud of it. And I think part of it is it feels like a gift to the world in a way that is not, I think when I wrote the other books with Dan, they were very much things that were always going to like help me continue to be a really good parent and all of that. This one is like the book that I wanted and no one had. And so I wanted to gift it to the world for new parents. And so, I'm not being very articulate about all of this, but I just am excited. And I feel like it's my birthday. My birthday is actually in a week or two, but
oh, wow.
It felt like my birthday this week because I'm just getting so many notes from people like congratulations. And, it feels so nice to be celebrated when you invest so much. It's like labor, but it lasts for like over a year.
I definitely can resonate with that.
Yes.
And I hope, I love that framing. And I do think it's a gift to the world because you're, not going to have another baby. So it's like, this is for everyone else. And I hope you write one on toddlers and teenagers really quickly. You've got like 4 more years or 5 more years for me to read that book. And I know people are just as big fans of you as I am. So if people want to support you, in venturing out, on your own and risking in these very fraught issues that people really, as we talked about, people hold on to them and really feel strongly. So it's really courageous of you. I admire that, Tina, to tackle that. How can people support you and support the book and tell us a little bit more about what you have coming up that people might be able to jump in on?
Yeah, so my website is tinabryson.com, and there you'll find links to all my social media. Right now, the place where we're posting the most is Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Tina Payne Bryson. Tons of live things coming up. Just if you're following, in fact, in 32 minutes, I'll be doing a live Instagram with Katherine McCord of Weelicious, which is, I love her. If you don't follow Katherine McCord and Weelicious, you're missing out. She's got beautiful, it's like, everything she posts is gorgeous. Like she does stuff with food. I used several of her recipes. Anyway, so I'll be talking to her about healthy eating and food habits from the beginning and how some of the research has changed on when we introduce allergens and which foods come first and what's this thing called baby-led weaning. It doesn't have to do with breastfeeding. There's all these things around all of that I'll be talking with her about. But yeah, there's lots of good things coming up. And I think if you are a parent, obviously, I hope you will enjoy the book, but if not, gift it to someone else. And I'm hoping that it'll be a word of mouth kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
One of my favorite, I know we're about to wrap up, but one of my favorite books I poured over because you talked about being neurotic. I was so neurotic, was a book called Baby 411. I think the Fields were the authors.
Yes. Yeah. I remember that.
It was like a long, skinny book, but really fat. Because I was neurotic about gear. I loved gear. I loved baby gear. I was like a crazy person, but I wanted to know, like, I need lots of drink holders. So I'm going to go look at all the strollers, and they basically kind of did a similar kind of thing. Like, here are the features you should watch for. Here's the stuff you don't need to pay for. And they kind of broke it down, alphabetically. It's funny. I'm just now thinking about that and how that might've been something in the back of my mind that made me think about how to do this book. But that was around gear. And I wanted, and why was there not something 20 years ago about the important stuff? Right?
Yeah, right. Well, you've written it. You've written it. So yeah, the number one thing people can do is buy the book, share the book with your friends. Definitely, I'm so excited for you, Tina. I'm really honored to have had this conversation with you and look forward to the sequel.
Thank you so much.
Okay.